Welcome to week 7 of Intro to OT. This week we are learning about the occupational therapy process. Our focus is course competency number 6, which states that you should be able to examine the practice framework process. Before viewing this lecture, you should have read chapter 8 in your Ryan text and pages S10 to S17 in the OT practice framework and pages S29 to S35. I would suggest you keep the OT practice framework in front of you during this lecture to use as a reference. I also would encourage you, if you need more time to look at the OT practice framework, feel free to pause the video. Let's begin. First, we're going to review from last week. Last week we talked about the OT practice framework and how it consisted of two main parts, the domain and the process. The domain speaks to what it is that OT does. Put differently, the domain outlines the profession's scope of what it is concerned with. It is the body of knowledge and expertise. For OT, this is mainly concerned with participation in occupations. The second part of the OT practice framework is the process. The process is the actions that the OT practitioners take when providing occupational therapy services to clients. This is where our focus is this week. You have read multiple sources which talk about the treatment process. What we will attempt to do here is combine the information from those sources so that you can have the best understanding possible. The OT process has several parts. Some are actual steps undertaken in the provision of OT services like screening, evaluation, and intervention, and other parts of the process are ancillary, such as clinical reasoning, therapeutic use of self, and activity analysis. These parts occur throughout the entire process. Next, we will take a closer look at each one of these parts of the OT process. Evaluation is the first step in the OT process. Evaluation is the process of gathering data. This can be initiated in one of two ways, either by screening or referral. Screening is done to determine whether a patient might benefit from OT services. It is the collection of data through observing a patient, interviewing a patient, and/or completing a review of the patient's general history, usually from a written source. Screening can be carried out by many health providers. Sometimes it might seem like screening is skipped when it is already known that the patient would benefit from OT and a referral is present. One example that is common is when a patient was receiving services in the hospital and is discharged to a facility for rehabilitation. They often come with a referral for OT services, but the OT will still screen to make sure that the patient is appropriate for OT services. Once it is determined that a patient is appropriate for OT, then a referral is made if there isn't already one present. A referral is a request for OT services. It is documented as part of the patient's chart. Many practice settings require approval for OT services to come from the patient's physician in order for services to be reimbursed. But this depends on several factors. We won't get into those here. Next in the evaluation process is the occupational profile. In the occupational profile is the gathering of information about the client's occupational history and experiences, patterns, interests, values, and needs. The evaluation then moves on to the analysis of occupational performance. Occupational performance is the accomplishment of selected occupations. During the analysis of occupational performance, formal assessment measures and observation of client performance is completed to gather more data on which to base later steps of the process. The data that was gathered in this is interpreted to identify client strengths and weaknesses, and to identify supports and barriers to occupations. Once these are identified, treatment planning occurs, which includes setting goals regarding problem areas. Goals are developed in collaboration with the client. Also part of the treatment planning process is the identification of potential approaches to interventions. Next in the therapeutic process is intervention. Intervention is all the skilled actions taken by the occupational therapy practitioners in collaboration with the client to facilitate engagement in occupation. It includes the plan, implementation, and review. The first step in intervention is the intervention plan. This is developed collaboratively with the client. The plan specifies OT approaches and types of interventions. For examples of types of interventions, see Table 6 on S29 in the OT Practice Framework. And for examples of approaches to interventions, see Table 8 on page S33. Next is the implementation of interventions. Implementation is where the plan is put into action. Implementation includes carrying out the interventions and monitoring the client's response to the interventions. Lastly is the intervention review. This happens at the same time as implementation. It is the process of reevaluating and reviewing the intervention plan, the effectiveness of the interventions provided, and the client's progress towards goals. It is continuous monitoring of the effectiveness of interventions. Once review has determined that the patient has reached all of the established goals, or that the patient can no longer benefit from OT services, then the OT program is discontinued or discharged. The term ancillary processes is my term. It is not used in the OT Practice Framework or in your Ryan text. Ancillary means that these processes provide necessary support to the primary activities of evaluation and intervention. These ancillary processes occur throughout the therapeutic process. They include clinical reasoning, therapeutic use of self, activity analysis, targeting of outcomes, and service management. Let's look at each one. Clinical reasoning is a thinking process that OT practitioners use to plan, direct, perform, and review what is occurring during the therapy process. It is how a practitioner decides what to do in a day-to-day treatment. It is thinking about what they know to determine what to do in therapy. Another ancillary process is the therapeutic use of self. This is the practitioner's management of the therapeutic relationship with the client. Anytime the practitioner interacts with the client, they are using therapeutic use of self. It is a collaborative relationship with the client. Also part of the ancillary processes is activity analysis. Activity analysis is examining all the aspects involved in an activity to be able to use the activity in the therapeutic process as either the means to achieving goals and outcomes or as the goal or outcome itself. Moving on to targeting of outcomes. Like other ancillary processes, targeting of outcomes occur at multiple points during therapy. Outcomes are the end result of therapy. They are what is expected to happen as a result of the occupational therapy interventions. Goals are a form of outcomes which are specific, objective, and measurable. Outcomes can also be subjective, and as such may not be measurable. One outcome might be increased confidence during functional mobility. Keep in mind, all goals are outcomes, but not all outcomes are goals. The final ancillary service is service management. Service management is the process of ensuring quality, efficiency, and effectiveness of the delivery of OT services. You will learn more about this in other classes, but for now understand that it includes tasks like documentation, coordination of services, and structuring the delivery of OT to multiple clients efficiently. To summarize, ancillary processes occur throughout the therapy process rather than in a particular step. They are supportive in nature but are no less essential to the delivery of services. One more thing to focus on in the therapy process. The OTA has certain things they can and cannot do in the therapy process. You have learned about this when we learned about the role of the OTA, but it makes sense to review some of this here. First, screening can be done by an OTA. It can be done by non-OT professionals, so it makes sense that it can be done by an OTA. OTs are ultimately responsible for all referrals, but OTs can initiate referrals in ADLs. OTs can carry out some parts of evaluative tasks as delegated by the OT and under supervision. Remember service competency? Some examples include observation of the client, completion of checklists, structured interview, and administration of structured assessments. OTAs can participate in the establishment of the treatment plan, including contributing to the establishment of goals, outcomes, intervention planning, and review. The OTA may carry out interventions with greater independence than most other tasks. As part of this, they are responsible for monitoring progress and reporting results. Finally, the OTA provides information to assist in the decision-making process for program discontinuation. This is not an all-inclusive list, but is a good review. That is the end of the lecture for Occupational Therapy Practice Framework process. As you continue to learn more, you will find that more and more of the pieces will come together. Your next task is to complete the OT process assignment. In this assignment, you will use what you have learned to complete certain questions on the assignment. You will then meet with your group and discuss your answers.